Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. I've been in a bit of a writing slump lately, if it wasn't evident from the fact that I only released one major video in July, and so I felt it was only right that I should fall back onto one of my comfort shows. And since I've already done a MASH book this year, that means it's time for another dip back into the well of Emergency, everyone's favorite paramedic procedural. Well, at least it's my favorite. Are there even that many other paramedic procedurals out there? Whatever, that's beside the point. If you don't know what Emergency is, go check out my review of the first comic, and yes, I did say comic. While there aren't any books, there are comic books based on Emergency, released by Charlton Comics, that contain 2-page prose stories inside them, and while I should just be looking at those, staying in my lane as it were, I had a lot of fun doing the first comic, so we're gonna do it again. So, without any further ado, this is All New Emergency number 2. Is pretty good. It's different from the first one in that while that one depicted high voltage wires, this one features a pretty bad fire, and Gage and DeSoto attempting to lift a beam that had fallen onto one of their fellow firefighters. The art is a little more cartoony than the last one, but I think that works since both Gage and DeSoto's likenesses are there, although we only again see the side of DeSoto, but I think it works. I really like the cover, and if I'd been trolling a long box looking for comics, it definitely would have stood out to me given how reddish-orange it is, which makes it very visually interesting. I also like the painted style of the fire itself, which makes it even more dynamic to me, plus the attention to detail as you can see some falling debris behind them. It's again done by Joe Staton, so no surprise that it looks really good. The artwork for the book itself is by Demetrio Sanchez Gomez, who did a lot of work for Charlton, particularly in doing the art for several romance comics, instead of John Byrne, who did the last book. Anyway, on to the comic itself. Our story opens up in the midst of what is probably that fire from the cover, as Johnny Gage and Roy DeSoto are saving that firefighter from that fallen beam as the narration caption details what they've been up to. For 22 hours, paramedics John Gage and Roy DeSoto have been too busy to eat a decent meal or get more than an hour's sleep. During that time, they'd rescued a dog in a backyard pool whose owners were away, entered a gas-filled cellar where a repairman had tried to reach the main gas valve to turn it off, hoping nothing would spark an explosion before they ventilated the area. Now they had answered a 2-alarm fire, and the captain had passed the word, paramedics needed on the double. Well, it's a good thing there's 2 of them, because paramedic needed on the single isn't quite as snappy. They handle the casualties and head back to the station for some rest, but before they do that, they have to replace the medical supplies in the ambulance, and then hightail it over to DeSoto's place for a cookout planned by Joan, DeSoto's wife. That wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that local jerks, the Lindens, Arnold and Luella, were invited under duress, as Luella cornered Joan in the supermarket and all but demanded an invite. They don't seem that bad, but just wait till you get to know them, as DeSoto explains to Gage. Meanwhile, at Rampart Emergency, an ambulance arrives with a woman whose husband's car broke down on the way to the hospital, and playing against cliché, the baby is born in the hospital instead of the back of the car. Back at the cookout, Gage is having it out with Arnold Linden because he thinks that either firefighters or paramedics, Arnold only says you guys, which could refer to either, don't deserve a pay raise, and Luella thinks they're overgrown kids playing games. I read in last night's paper how you guys are looking for another raise. For what? You don't have to work like the rest of us. That guy must be dumber than he looks, because yeah, they don't work like the rest of us. They willingly walk into burning buildings. And then he has the audacity to complain about the food, and then his wife goes digging through DeSoto's fridge to find 2 steaks that DeSoto had been saving for Dixie and Brackett. And then Arnold has the audacity to ask for his to be well done. Hank, tell DeSoto what he should do.
We ask them politely yet firmly to leave.
Although that would have been my advice even before they pilfered the steak, if I'm being honest. And if you expected me to make the slightly less low-hanging I think you should leave reference, although I feel like you probably didn't, you're absolutely right. Honestly, I'd have expected they'd have demanded a glass of water to slop up those steaks because they're such huge pieces of shit, given Arnold's slick back hair.
You think this is slick back? This is pushback.
Gage goes out to the store to get more steaks, and when he returns, in a bit of cosmic karma, Arnold begins to choke on his steak, and while I expected this scene to go like when Julia was choking in that episode of Frasier, being the consummate professionals they are, Gage and DeSoto immediately go into paramedic mode and attempt to dislodge the blockage. Of course, since this comic was released in the 70s, the science has changed a little, and Gage's initial attempts to reach inside isn't what you usually do unless the person was unconscious, and the fact that he darn near bit my fingers off means that he wasn't, so he has to try the Heimlich maneuver, which of course was only introduced in 1974, so it was very new at the time and no one really knows about it. It works, although Luella complains that they should have used back blows to dislodge it, which have since gone out of fashion in favor of the Heimlich, so Gage and DeSoto made the right call. They send him off in an ambulance, which I imagine was for the benefit of his health, DeSoto's sanity, and the barbecue's vibe, as Brackett and Dixie show up, who concur with their quick thinking. He was asphyxiating. You had no choice, Gage. You had to remove the obstruction. 2 days later, Gage and DeSoto discuss the cookout, and DeSoto reveals that Arnold is playing the litigation card, claiming to be numb in his left leg as a result of Gage performing the Heimlich. Obviously, he's lying, but unfortunately they don't have any evidence that he is, so they just have to wait and see. In the meantime, Squad 51 is sent on a call where a 10-year-old boy has gotten stuck in a drain pipe, which usually would be urgent enough, but he had the misfortune of getting stuck in the middle of a very heavy rainstorm, so the drain is filling up quickly and liable to drown the poor kid. They tell the kid to go out the way he came, but the passage caved in while he was inside, so he's trapped, with the water continually rising. DeSoto manages to clear a path and goes in for the kid, but they can't escape out the same way, because it caved in even more. Can't move, Johnny, the tunnel just caved in more. If a heavy truck goes by, it could collapse completely. And so they need Gage to open up the grate with the jaws of life, which are the only jaws that you want to hear about when you're trapped in the water. It's rising faster, Johnny. No. The water's getting deeper. We're gonna drown. No, you're not, son. Just keep your cool. He's successful, and they escape, despite the water rushing out and dragging the three of them along for the ride, and may I say, that's a very dynamic panel. They get the kid proper medical attention, and he's on his way to the hospital, and Gage and DeSoto are on their way back to the station. And the weather has pretty miraculously cleared up. I mean, it went from a torrential downpour with dark gray skies to relatively sunny and dry. Evidently, the jaws of life are so impressive that they can alter the weather patterns. As they drive, they discuss the lawsuit. Is that guy for real, Roy? Can he really sue us? He's got a lawyer filing suit against us, John. The lawyer wouldn't take the case if he didn't think he could win. They're just gonna have to hire an even better lawyer to defend them. And I think I know just who could do the job. Matlock. If anyone's gonna do all he can to defend two iconic TV characters, it's Andy Griffith. Then we skip ahead another week, as Arnold Linden confronts DeSoto about the subpoena that he served upon them, and although DeSoto thinks Linden's full of crap, Kelly Brackett said there's no way to disprove his claims. Then we skip ahead another few days. Jeez, it's like this comic is making up for the first issue's overly long intro with the cop going to find that factory owner by having the pacing of this story ebb and flow like the tide. After they bring in a smoke inhalation victim, Brackett warns them that an investigator had been sniffing around Rampart. Now you know why doctors have to carry expensive malpractice insurance. You guys aren't covered when you're off duty. The duo wallow about their situation, and DeSoto even wonders if they should have saved Arnold's life in the first place, but both Gage and DeSoto's wife agree that they have to save every life, even the ones belonging to people they don't like. Roy wants to keep an eye on Linden to catch him in a lie, but Gage tells him to keep away and let the courts discover the truth, which is a surprisingly level-headed idea from Gage, who was usually the more impulsive figure in the duo. Like, in just the last comic, he went off on his own investigation into the stolen radium, even though it stopped being his case once the flames went out. And here he's telling DeSoto not to go off on his own solo adventure. Actually, if Gage's goal was to make it so DeSoto didn't steal the spotlight from him, I think that would actually track. Anyway, there's the famous 11th hour disaster that was conspicuously absent from the previous comic as they get called in to put out a boat fire on a lake. The victim wants to go back for his wallet, since he knows how expensive that ambulance ride is going to be, but while Gage and DeSoto try to talk him down, the boat explodes, sending them all flying into the water in another really cool looking panel. Don't worry, they're fine. Once they drag the victim out, he cries in anguish. "My money!" "That's shallow water, you can get your money some other time. Right now, you're going to Rampart Emergency to make sure you're okay." "Yeah, but I'm gonna need that money to pay my hospital bill." And the story ends with the victim being delivered to Dixie and Brackett, and some good news being delivered to Gage and DeSoto. It turns out that another neighbor of DeSoto's, one who likely dislikes the Lindens as much as everyone else, was taking some home movies and spotted Arnold Linden playing basketball in his driveway, meaning his claims of partial paralysis can now be proven as bogus through the magic of video. And so the comic ends with DeSoto and Gage discussing the moral of the story. "For a while, I was convinced that you shouldn't help others. Most people are nice, Roy, but we gotta remember to be careful from now on. We're easy targets anytime someone wants to throw a malpractice suit at us. But next time Linden is in danger, we sit that one out." But we're not done yet, because like I said at the start, there's a 2-page prose story, The Phantom of Ramparts. Let's see, which reference do I use? I can do a The Phantom reference. When the Phantom moves, Rampart stands still. But people would probably expect the Phantom of the Opera joke, right? Do I have a white half-mask lying around? I bet I could probably work a Phantom Tollbooth joke into it, but nah, it's too deep a cut. Wait a minute, isn't there an Ace Attorney character called Phantom? Oh, damn it, I should have made a Phoenix Wright reference before instead of a Matlock joke. Damn my dated references. Wait a minute, I think I've been overthinking this too much. I just gotta go with the first joke that comes to my head. Here we go. He's a phantom? Rampart Phantom. Does that joke land? I'm standing by it. Anyway, the story, which features art from the first issue, notice Mr. Davin's reappearance here, features a mysterious injured man staggering into Rampart in a flashy leisure suit, who's looked over by Joe Early and Dixie. If his name turns out to be Larry, Dixie better watch out. When they ask for his name, he tells them that he's John Williams. I had no idea that musical composition was such a dangerous job. They ask how he got such a nasty gash in his neck, and while Mr. Williams tells them that he tripped running for the bus into a fence, Early and Dixie know that it's a gunshot wound, and that Williams is likely a criminal of some sort. They intend to hand Williams over to a cop, but before they get the chance, a car pulls up and some of Williams' associates show up, and burst into the emergency room. Thinking quickly, Dixie puts a toe tag on Williams and covers him with a sheet. When the two hoodlums, as the story calls them, rush in, Early tries to stall them, but they get impatient and demand they're told what happened to Williams. Dixie steps in and gasps when she reads Williams' toe tag, having written cholera on it, and Early and Dixie tell the hoodlums that it's a deadly disease that they're vaccinated against, being doctors, but the hoodlums probably aren't. They rush out and are promptly taken into custody by the police, who were warned about them over the radio, and when the cop asks Early and Dixie what they did, Williams sits up and tells the cop that they shot him, and that if he gets police protection, he'll turn state's evidence on them. The story ends with Dixie remarking that it never gets dull at Rampart, and much like Rick Harrison, they never know who's going to walk through those doors next. The Literary Lair will return, but first, a word from our sponsor. Obviously, we love print media here at Black Scarab Films, but we also love books in all of their forms, including audio. I'm a fairly recent convert to the world of audiobooks, first when it provided me a way to read books during my commute, despite not having a free hand to turn pages with. And now, I've found audiobooks very useful for doing other tasks that would have usually prevented me from indulging in my favorite pastime, like when I'm folding laundry, cooking a meal, or even walking the dog. Gotta love multitasking, right? Which is why it's so fortunate that this episode is sponsored by Audible.com. If you love books and want to find a way to read more even when you don't have a free hand, audiobooks are the way to go. And if you like my channel and want to help support my videos, you can go to this link, audibletrial.com/BlackScarabFilms to get a 30-day free trial and one free audiobook. My personal recommendation this month is I Must Say, My Life as a Humble Comedy Legend, written and narrated by Martin Short. Even if you aren't a fan of Short, I guarantee that you'll love this audiobook, because when I started listening to it, I wasn't a fan of Martin Short either, and now he's one of my favorite actors of all time. But if that's not your taste, there are literally thousands of audiobooks on Audible, so I'm sure you'll find something to your liking. Happy listening, and that link again is audibletrial.com/BlackScarabFilmZ. This comic is really enjoyable, and unlike the first comic, it truly feels like an episode of the show, whereas the first one was one long standalone story that focused pretty securely on John Gage, and only factored everyone else in when it was necessary for the plot. This one is a real ensemble piece. It's got multiple emergencies that include all types of problems: the fire, the child stuck in the drain, the boat explosion, in addition to Dixie and Brackett's labor case, and the pacing is really good too. It never feels like anything gets too much or too little attention, although I feel like that montage of time skips was expanding the timescale a little too much for a reason that I can't fathom. But as opposed to that really long opening that the first comic had, there wasn't any real padding in the story. I also liked how it featured more of Rampart making an impact, with Brackett and Dixie having that baby coming into the hospital for them alone, before they left for DeSoto's barbecue. Still no Joe Early, outside another token mention in the main comic and his main role in the prose story. Did they not have Bobby Troop's likeness rights or something?
Can't!
Goddamn army.
But at least Dixie and Brackett were involved in the action, and it wasn't just Johnny Gage, private detective, the whole time. Although I'm not opposed to Johnny Gage, private detective, if the powers that be wanted to reboot Emergency for modern audiences. I'd have liked more of the Firehouse Crew outside of the brief cameo at the start offering coffee, but beggars can't be choosers, and at least there was more DeSoto in this one, as both Gage and DeSoto got to make daring rescues. And the premise really felt like something you'd see on the show. One episode I remember featured Gage having issues with his charge card account, and fell in love with the phone operator, a plot thread that persisted until the end of the episode, and the plot detailing Arnold Linden's douchebaggery is a fun plot to have in between the rescues. And it's got a neat little resolution at the end that totally fits in with the general tone of the show. The characters are written consistently, and I could hear the actors' voices as the characters spoke in the comic. And the original characters, particularly Arnold and Llewellyn Linden, are so perfect in how absolutely awful they are. I hated them so much that, I felt angry when they were being rude to DeSoto, Gage, and DeSoto's wife, and it's not just because I'm a fan of these characters. I was thinking that if I was at that barbecue, you'd have had to hold me back from smacking them around because they were just so evil and reprehensible in their dickery. And the prose story, while nothing special on its own, hence why I discussed the entire comic, is a cute little standalone tale that not only gives us some much-needed Joe Early, but gives Dixie a chance to shine in a way that she hasn't gotten to in the comic proper yet. There are 4 issues and 4 principal characters who have appeared so far, so maybe Dixie gets to shine in issue 3 or 4. Regardless, the artwork is pretty solid. The likenesses of all the characters are there, and you can tell at a glance who everyone's supposed to be. Although I don't think you can truly get across the majesty of Robert Fuller's magnificent hair on the pages of a comic book. Seriously, that man's hair is awesome, and I wish mine looked that good. I also wished it looked as good as Randolph Mantoo's, for that matter, but there were a lot of really dynamic shots that I think would have been difficult to pull off in live action, so I think this comic justifies its existence a little more than the previous one. And that was All New Emergency number 2, a comic that pretty much made up for every critique I had on the first issue. They've got a personal plot for Gage and DeSoto that isn't the only plot of the comic, Rampart factors into the story a lot more heavily, and with their own plots, and the padding is limited. Not to mention the prose story felt a lot more substantial, despite being the same length as the last one. Honestly, I had a lot of fun reading this comic, and I hope the remaining comics are more akin to this one than the first one. But as it stands for this comic, I definitely recommend it, if you're a fan of Emergency, and if, like me, you could track down a copy of it, it's definitely worth it. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Ah, dang it, I could have just made a reference to the Phantom Piper from Doctor Who and the Cybermen. After they bring in a smoke inhalation victim, Brackett warns them that an investigator had been snipping around Rampart. Snip, snip, snip. Okay, this seems to be a little difficult, but we're going to have to maneuver this, because I can't really click it and do it at the same time. So, I don't do this. Okay, I know what I do. I'm going to put the image over it. The image will go over it. Most people are not... I'm doing Australian accent for John Gage. I think he's Native American.